So let's start with part A here. X squared minus 7x minus 7 equals 0. We want to use completing the square to solve this quadratic equation. Let's bring up the steps for completing the square. Okay, step 1 says get c to the right side of the equation. So here this negative 1 is our c term. So we add 1 to both sides to get that to the right. What that leaves us with is x squared minus 7x. Notice how I leave some space to the right of 7x equals 1 on the right. Okay, step 2, it says take our b term. The b term is the one connected to the x, and divide it by 2. Okay, so we have negative 7x divided by 2. Okay, well, negative 7 halves. All right. Step 3 says square that result. Okay, so let's square it. Squaring that gives 49 fourths, which is why you really don't have to worry about bringing that negative through with your b term. No matter what, it gets squared out anyway. So you can bring the negative or not bring the negative. It gives a positive result no matter what once we get to step 3. Okay, step 4. Add that result to both sides. Okay, so we're adding 49 fourths to both sides. 49 fourths plus 49 fourths. Okay, the left side is now a perfect square trinomial. So this is really just x minus 7 halves quantity squared. Now, how did I get that? I'm using this equation, and we'll always have a perfect square trinomial of the form a squared plus or minus 2ab plus b squared. Okay, so the quick shortcut, you don't have to really think about all this big equation and everything. Just take the first term, take the square root of it, that goes in the first slot. Take the second term, take the square root of it, that goes in the second slot. Take the sign from the middle, that gives you the sign in the middle. Right, that's the quick shot. Don't overthink this step. On the right hand side, we have 1 plus 49 fourths. So let's get a common denominator here. I'm going to take this 1 and multiply it by 4 fourths. So that gives us 4 plus 49 over 4, all over 4. Okay, so 53 fourths. All right, so on the right hand side, 53 fourths. Now back to our steps. We are now at step 6, use the square root property to solve. Okay, well that means we take the square root of both sides, and we are always careful to add on a plus or minus. Anytime we take the square root as our choice of part of solving a problem, we add on that plus or minus. What does this give? All right, x minus 7 halves equals plus or minus rad 53 over 2. Okay, so I broke up the square root into rad 53 over rad 4, and then the square root of 4 is simply 2. Finally, we're solving for x, so I'm going to add 7 halves to both sides. So x equals 7 halves plus or minus rad 53 over 2, which is a perfectly fine answer. We could also write this as 7 plus or minus rad 53 all over 2. Note that this is actually 2 different answers, 7 plus rad 53 over 2 and 7 minus rad 53 over 2. One other thing to note is that we could not have solved this original equation by factoring, right? X squared minus 7x minus 1. You can try all day to factor that, it's not going to work. So this is where we had to use a separate method. We chose completing the square in this case. There are other methods. Let's try another one. Okay, here we want to use completing the square to solve y squared plus 8y plus 18 equals 0. Let's bring up our steps again. And let's note one very important thing. This method only works when our leading coefficient here is 1, right? Or basically there's no leading coefficient, right? Because when there's nothing there, that means there's secretly a 1 hidden there. So if that's not the case, we have to do a little bit more work. We're good to go for now because there's just a 1 hanging out in front. So let's get to it. Step 1, get c to the right side of the equation. Okay, so plus 18, that's our c term. So I'm going to subtract 18 from both sides. 18. This gives us y squared plus 8y, leave some space, equals negative 18. Step 2, take our b term and divide it by 2. What is our b term? Well, our b term is the one connected to the single variable. Okay, so we take that, 8, divide by 2, that gives us 4. Square that result, that gives us 16. All right, square that result, that's step 3. Step 4, add that result, so that's 16 now, to both sides. Okay, plus 16, plus 16. Now we write the left side, so step 5, left side is a perfect square. So this is y plus 4 squared. Okay, on the right side we have negative 2. Remember, to get the y plus 4, I just took the square root of the first term, square root of the last term, that gave us my first slot and my last slot there, and then I took the sign from the middle to give me the sign in the middle. This will always make a perfect square trinomial, so you don't have to worry about factoring it or anything like that. Just take the square root of the first, square root of the last. It'll always get you there. On to step 6, use the square root property to solve. Square root of both sides, don't forget the plus or minus. This gives us y plus 4 equals plus or minus, I'm going to write this as I rad 2. We have a negative inside the square root, so we can think of that as coming out of the radical as an I. One last step to solve, y equals negative 4 plus or minus I rad 2. Again, this is actually two answers, negative 4 plus I rad 2 and negative 4 minus I rad 2. The plus or minus is just a convenient way to save some space when writing our solutions.